moved my family to Austin in 2000. The population since we got here has doubled. Austin has, for the size of the city, one of the most mediocre transit systems in America.
Traditionally, regulation has been put in place for all the best of intentions.
And I've been a council member since January of 2015. My concern was getting in and saying, look, let's get some technical solutions to fixing the traffic congestion.
It's been meant to lower prices or offer us more choices or provide higher quality goods or solve information problems.
But instead, the new city council chose to focus on Uber and Lyft.
When Uber and Lyft first came around, the laws were written for the taxis.
The results of regulating in the transportation field or the lodging field, for example, has not been particularly good, and they've been the two most ripe sectors for disruption.
I think government definitely has a role. I think it's state and local governments that really have to think about this.
This newer model had not been envisioned, was not planned for, and so Uber and Lyft, when they began, had to operate either in a gray area or in some cases just flagrantly against the law.
Extra background checks and a city fee. 23,000 Austinites signed an Uber petition against these proposed regulations for the ride-sharing service. But right now, an Austin Mobility Committee is discussing those proposed policies.
The chairman of the Mobility Committee is a city council member by the name of Ann Kitchen. She came up with an ordinance saying that fingerprinting should be mandated, and then there were some other details. But in essence, it was a question of fingerprinting. And from the time that she introduced it, she argued that this was a public safety issue.
The fingerprint is an identifier. It's a biometric identifier. And our public safety experts tell us that it is the best way to make sure that you're checking the background of the person, that they're who they say they are.
The problem here is that Uber has its own proprietary background check process, and it seems to be working.
We are, in many ways, much safer in that environment than they are in a traditional taxi cab.
The director of transportation in the city of Austin recommended that the city adopt the background check that Uber and Lyft employ, and it should be extended across the board to include Austin taxi cabs.
If you go down and you hail a cab, it picks you up and drops you off somewhere. Nobody knows when you've been picked up, when you've been dropped off, where you're going, and if you ever get there. Compare that to, say, Uber.
I've done about maybe 250, 275 rides since I've started, and I would say majority of the time I feel safe. There's been like 2 instances where I was just kind of like, oh, what's going on here? This is what people warned me about.
If you've read the regulation, you'll recognize that what they tried to do is they tried to impose taxi franchise regulations onto rideshare. It's not just about the fingerprint background checks, it was also a fire extinguisher in the back of your car.
The danger of applying yesterday's regulation to today's high-speed technologies is that you could ultimately slow down what are some of the most innovative and pro-consumer innovations that we know today.
Think of all the amazing things that wouldn't come to pass if every time something new came along that disrupted somebody's job, we stopped it.
TNCs are a very important part of our ground transportation because they're an option. We are not talking about shutting down TNCs. That is misinformation.
You would think that the regulations are there to protect the consumers, to make your ride, in fact, pleasant. But really they serve a much different purpose, and that is protecting the existing taxi cab companies from continued competition.
Regulations set up this nightmare, and essentially technology has now allowed us to change the situation by allowing us to do an end run around the old regulatory regime. I like to call that technological civil disobedience.
The idea that there's no regulation going on in the shared economy just because the government doesn't happen to be regulating it is mistaken. There's plenty of regulation going on. It's market regulation.
First of all, that's kind of a misnomer. I mean, regulation really should sit with an outside entity that doesn't have an incentive in the process.
When you take an Uber ride, for example, you're asked at the end of the ride to rate your driver on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. And if you rate a driver 3 stars or less, you will immediately get an email from Uber asking what the problem was.
There's been studies that have found that if you ride in a cab with a person of the same race or an Uber or a Lyft car with a person of the same race, you're much more likely to give them a higher rating. And so there's definitely biases in the rating system, and that alone, or other similar models like that, aren't enough to regulate.
Within days, you had a grassroots movement to petition the city to protest the vote.
Uber and Lyft said, we're not going to tolerate this ordinance, and they went out and collected 65,000 signatures on a petition to have an alternative ordinance adopted that would have retained a lot of these regulations but would have eliminated the requirement of fingerprinting for ride-sharing drivers, leaving fingerprinting in place for taxi drivers and pedicab drivers and other drivers.
Within 2 weeks, they had blown through the greatest number of signatures for putting something on the ballot in the history of Austin. And they set the date for the election in May.
I know that the council deliberately framed the ballot language of Prop 1 to get people to vote against it.
Saturday is Austin's election on the future of ride sharing in Austin. And if the voters don't go their way, Lyft and Uber have said they will leave the city.
The rideshare people thought that they had to spend millions of dollars educating people because the ballot language was faulty.
You couldn't listen to the radio without listening to pro-Prop 1 ads. You couldn't watch TV without pro-Prop 1 ads, full-page ads in the newspapers, multiple mail pieces every day.
So vote for Prop 1 and keep ride sharing in Austin.
Good luck.
I actually had some of my friends that ended up voting against it because they were so angry at the amount of money that's being spent. They got suspicious. Somebody's trying to buy my vote, and they voted against it.
Proposition 1, which would have kept current rules for ride-sharing drivers in place, failed.
Uber and Lyft are no more in Austin. They closed up shop in the city this morning.
So our absolute first priority is to help the drivers sign up for other companies and get that pool going.
The reason they ultimately passed it was because of progressive political ideology, which says that it's the government, the federal government, state government, local government, it's government that is your best chance for safety, for prosperity, for whatever it might be.
Local governments should not be in a position of protecting a particular industry or a particular class of jobs per se. What they should be in the position of doing is providing a framework for individuals to compete and provide the best service possible to consumers.
In a well-functioning economy, industries or services that are no longer desired or no longer producing what people want efficiently, they go by the wayside. We should want that to happen.
And it's giving us more choices, more competition, better prices, and yet we don't see the harms that we're alleged to be developing if we didn't regulate.
Whether it is the internet, ride sharing, or you name it. People think that there has to be regulation there, otherwise there will be chaos, and that's simply not true.
So the profit incentive works fantastic for the majority of consumers. But if you're one of a small number of minority consumers, let's say you're disabled, there's not much of a profit incentive for Uber to go rehaul the entire app unless there's some kind of outcry for it, or some kind of government pressure or some other kind of external pressure.
Don't start with the worst case scenario and try to regulate to solve it. Instead, see how far self-regulation can take you.
I'm very skeptical of anybody seeking special privileges or exemptions from a regulatory scheme, and the fingerprinting in particular didn't seem like somehow the ride sharing should not have to submit to that.
We all do it.
That's right.
Nurses do it,
That's
cab
right.
drivers do it, real estate agents do it, all of us do it, okay?
Right.
We will not allow a company to come in here and say we're gonna set the rules for the city.
By having the consistent application of rules, whatever they are, to everybody, that if the rule was a bad rule, if it made no sense, if it was costly, burdensome, then the more widely that rule is applied, the more likely it is that people would recognize the imprudence of the rule and repeal it or revise it.
Some say, well, we need to level the playing field by regulating everyone up to be the same as the old players. The better solution is to instead liberalize down or deregulate down in the direction of the emerging technologies that are essentially born free as opposed to born in regulatory captivity.
Why don't we offer deregulation to the taxi companies and allow them to respond to market forces?
It doesn't make sense that you need to change what's not broke. You don't fix what's broke.
You leave it alone.
But the taxi company said no. No, they didn't want anything to do with deregulation. They wanted to impose these onerous restrictions onto the new rideshare model, knowing that would hurt their business model more than it hurts the taxis.
The purpose of regulation is not taxi cab welfare or hotel welfare, it's consumer welfare.
I think in the aftermath of the Prop 1 defeat, there's a lot more regret than there is crowing about how we beat Uber and Lyft.
We are one of the few cities in the entire country, I should say one of the few major cities in the entire country where people do not have access to Uber and Lyft. And I think that has been clearly to the detriment of the people of Austin.
Austin is growing. Austin is becoming a bigger and bigger city. They can't stop that, but it's like they're trying to keep Austin small.
Overnight, 10,000 people were out of a job because the city and these companies didn't get along.
You have Mayor Steve Adler on one side trying to find a solution to bring Uber and Lyft back into operation in the city of Austin. On the other side, you have Councilmember Ann Kitchen, who says that she is not budging one bit on the rules to get fingerprinted drivers behind the wheel only.
People have just been forced to get used to it. They're still unhappy, but my guess is that Uber and Lyft are not going to come back until they get what they want.
The fact of the matter is that there are very strong arguments that can be made against the fingerprinting background check process. And this is all much ado about nothing, as we often hear. This is, in fact, the classic solution in search of a problem.
I don't have any problems with a new industry displacing an older one that just doesn't seem to be working, for instance, the taxi cab industry. But at the same time, I also see the need for more regulation. A simple background check is really not too onerous.
The problem is we've already been down this path and tried that sort of regulatory approach for other technologies and sectors, and it ultimately led to less competition, less innovation, less choice, higher prices.
It's going to take a big event, maybe a South by Southwest, for Austin to really get angry about this. And that hasn't happened yet, but it is a desert. It is currently a transit desert.